So finally, after so many years, we finally get the sequel to Gladiator. And I gotta be honest, I was entertained. I really like this movie. Now I know to a lot of you fans of the first Gladiator movie just spit, just straight up just went and just really want to throw a brick at my face because I just said something so blasphemous. But if I'm gonna be honest, I really like the film. I think it's a worthy sequel. Well, not a worthy sequel, I'll get into it. But yeah, I felt like this was a decent film overall. Now, I'll give my thoughts on the first movie. Although I don't dislike it, I definitely don't think it's like a masterpiece. I do think it's an extremely good movie, really well made, with some fantastic action, acting, all around. Everything is good about it, but something's holding me back from really considering it like one of the greatest films of all time. I don't know what it is, but you know, just whenever people say like it's one of the greatest films of all time, I can just never hop on that bandwagon for some reason. But this sequel, however, I had extremely low expectations for. I'm going to be honest here. The people that hated the trailer just because of the music and they seriously believed that the rap music was going to be part of the film, I'm just going to say it. That is like the stupidest thing you guys could honestly think. That Ridley Scott, a man of like some of class, and even just like any studio executive would honestly think about putting a rap song into their movie. Yes, they put it into the trailer. Yeah, I do think it was awkward and doesn't fit the tone of everything, but most of the comments, they mostly just said like, yeah, this transported me straight back to that era. I'm like, I get that's supposed to be sarcasm, but you know, you really think that's what their intended goal was? We're gonna add in this song because it transports them? No, like, anyway, it's a stupid thing that happened when the trailer first released, so I had extremely low expectations for it. And after seeing the film opening night on Thursday, I didn't get to reviewing it because I got out of the theater pretty late. I was pretty tired. I had work the next morning, so I wanted to get to bed. And I wanted to overall just get my thoughts out on the film. And now that I kind of have like a decent grasp of what I think about the film, I feel like I can now review it and give it like a fair review. Obviously, let me get the positives out of the way first. First of all, I want to say that the action, especially in this movie, is really, really well done, in my opinion. I feel like it was exciting, particularly the opening action sequence was really engaging, really fun, and just really, it was just a really entertaining set piece. I know Ridley Scott originally hyped it up as like one of the biggest action scenes he ever did, and although I don't disagree, it's not as big as you might hope, and I'll get more into this into my negatives a little bit, but I do feel like the opening action sequence is really well done, and even the other action sequences in this movie are just really good. You know, you get the Colosseum being filled up with water and they do that whole naval battle. That's a really cool scene. You know, Lucius fighting a rhino, like that, those are all really cool sequences that I really do enjoy. The acting of this movie is really good. Not as good as the first movie. I'll get more into it with the negatives here. I do feel like everyone is doing a fantastic job in this movie. I feel like nothing about it is half-assed. Denzel Washington is just having a time of his life. He's knocking it out of the park with this movie. I mean, when is he not given like a bad performance? I haven't seen all his movies, so if you can think of a movie where he just gives a god-awful performance, please, I'm all ears. But yeah, the acting is really good. The villains, although I don't particularly find them, memorable, I do feel like for the most part, they aren't terrible as like villains, but they definitely aren't up to par to what Joaquin was in the first film. So that is a bit of a letdown. Again, I'll get more into this into the negative section, but that's kind of how I felt about the villains. They do a good job with what they're given, but it doesn't add like as much as you might want them to. So the action sequences, the acting, that's really good. The way this movie looks, this movie's beautiful, by the way. This movie just has a lot of beautiful scenery and just all the sets of like Rome. Like, it is a very pretty film to look at. It's really good in that aspect. So technically speaking, this movie knocks it out of the park. The action, although campy and over the top, it's still fun. The action scenes are really, really cool, really entertaining, really fun. You'll have a good time. The actors are having a good time, it looks like. No one's giving a half-assed performance. But overall, there aren't a whole lot of more positives I can say beyond that, because I'm going to move on to the negatives a little bit. So to bring it back all towards the action, like I said, I praise the action. The action in this movie is really, really well done. But this is the movie's greatest strength and weakness, that although the action, for what you're given, is really, really good, I feel like this movie was holding back quite a bit of action or violence that they could have done. You know, the sequence with the rhino. You would probably expect, like many of the gladiators, to just get absolutely, bodied by a rhino or stabbed by one of them. Spoiler alert here. But one of the gladiators does get stabbed by a rhino, and he gets thrown and ragdolls up against a pole, and it's freaking awesome. I was almost laughing like a maniac because I thought it was really cool. It was like a really cool moment. And then after that, the movie just doesn't really go that far. It kind of moves on to like the other big set piece of Lucius dodging the rhino. That's a pretty cool moment. And then he fights the gladiator on top of that. But once you get by the end of that fight, the rhino doesn't do anything outside of just standing there. I feel like with as agitated as it was, it could have definitely, I don't know, like if we got a one-on-one with Lucius and the rhino, that could have been fun and cool, but overall it's just it's a little disappointing. Even the naval battle where they're flooding the Colosseum, as cool as that is, it's like a 2-minute battle sequence. And you just can't help but go like, man, I feel like there's so much more. I feel like a chunk of this movie is rushed. And that's disappointing to me because I really do feel like effort was put into it. Like I said, with the villains not being memorable, even though the performances are good, I feel like that's the issue. Again, both the strength and the weakness, that even though the villains, I forgot their names. I can only refer to them as the villains. I can not say their names unless I literally look up, who they're playing on Google. But I can't remember them, and I feel like this movie can't focus on what kind of villain it wants to do. Like, I don't want to spoil the villain. Honestly, actually, it's not really even a spoiler at this point, because I'm assuming you guys can probably figure out the pieces from there. But Denzel Washington is the overall villain by the end of this movie, and I feel like this movie never really commits to going like, kind of dropping in clues. There's a weird edit. I watched this with a buddy of mine, but there's a weird edit in this movie that you feel like a lot was cut out. So obviously Pedro Pascal and his wife, they're all, plotting against the emperors, and they eventually find out, and that's how Pedro Pascal's character ends up, Cassius, that's his character's name, ends up in the arena fighting the gladiators and eventually Lucius. And before that build-up, there's like one small scene in the beginning where they're talking about it, but after that, it's almost as if everything was left on the cutting room floor. A random, Roman woman happens to stumble across a conversation, then talks with one of the higher-ups, and then eventually they're caught. So you just feel like we were missing a couple of scenes. So it's a weird edit there. There are a bunch of weird edits. The CGI is really wonky at times. The monkey fight sequence, although Again, short sequence, short and sweet, but I feel like this movie, they don't look like, obviously they're not monkeys, they're baboons, but they don't even look like monkeys. Or the baboons. They don't look like the animals they're supposed to be portraying. They look like the alien, like they look like random alien hybrids almost. It's very uncanny, but at the same time, like I said, praising the action, it's still, the effect is there. And it does pull it off in the end. Also, before I wrap up this review, because I don't have a whole lot else to say about the movie unless I really go in depth, but I don't want to. I just want to make this a quick review and just really say if it's really something you should see. But also the story overall, again, I feel like it's just not. This is essentially a remake of the first Gladiator, which is kind of disappointing. You would, I don't know, expect, a different story or a different plot line, and instead they went with, let's just do Gladiator but kind of moderned up. And that's disappointing that they didn't go for a different story. So you can't help but feel really massively let down and disappointed in that aspect. So with all that said, with all the negatives, all the positives, is this movie worth seeing? In my opinion, yes. I do feel like this is a really good sequel. It has its issues, a lot of issues, believe me, starting with its existence. But overall, I kind of grown a soft spot for it. The more I've thought about it, the more I just kind of thought and just really think about it, the more I kind of just went like, okay, clearly Ridley Scott does care about this. He does care about these characters, this world. It may not seem like it, but you know what? The man has a talent, and the fact that, I'm just going to mention it, Ridley Scott's making a movie like this at 86 years old, and I mean, you can never even tell. I mean, it's as if he's in his prime directing. Like, that's the really cool part in all this. So again, technical aspects and really cool action aside, and really good acting, this movie has a crap load of issues that will either make or break the film for you. For me, since I'm going into movies a little bit more optimistically, I went in to this movie with little to no expectations other than literally, let's just see if I can be entertained. And I was. I was entertained. I felt like this was a really good sequel. I don't feel like there should be a third one. I know they're planning a third one, but I honestly believe this is where the story should end. It should just end there, because I feel like it's a really good send-off. Anyway, that's about it. Take it easy.